What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Pro vs. Pro. This week's show, as you probably can already tell, is a solo show. Justin could not make this one. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Sony Open, recap the Tournament of Champions just a touch, and talk some general strategy. And really, I think there's kind of a low-hanging fruit type of edge that has really come to the forefront this week with some of the analysis that I've already seen. To start with the recap of the Tournament of Champions, it's nice to get back to it, but at the same time, we also, I think, saw the reason why we don't necessarily love no-cut events. We don't love these smaller fields. Credit to John Rahm for such a fantastic comeback, and it's kind of a bummer to see Collin Morikawa, just somebody who is so easy to root for, kind of melt down the way that he did. But at least he did so in such a way that was consistent with the course fit model. You know, the course fit model said, hey, around the green play is going to be really important. That kind of did Morikawa in coming down the stretch. But the stat that I want to talk about that I have seen around the industry this week a lot, and it hasn't just been shared by one person, hasn't just been shared by five. I mean, we're talking like 10 to 15 different sources have kind of shared the stat that 8 of the last 9 winners at the Sony Open have played in the previous week at the Tournament of Champions. And the way that this stat is presented kind of implies that there's this major advantage the players have from playing the previous week, that they were able to shake the rust off, that they were able to get their mind back into like a hyper competitive mode. And that advantage has shown up in the sense that guys who played the previous week end up winning the next week. And on a large scale, this is a selection bias mistake. And it's an argument about trends that I think shows up time and time again throughout the season. And the best way to kind of explain why this is a mistake in thinking is because the implication here is that there are basically two groups, that you can split this field for the Sony Open into two groups. On the one hand, you have the group of players who played last week, and on the other hand, you have the group of players who did not. And the implication here is that, again, the group that did not play last week is at a severe disadvantage. However, you can also split the group or split the field into two different groups. You can take the 10 best players in the field and the rest. And the problem is that the 10 best players will have almost always all played the previous week. Maybe there have been some years where it's only been like 8 of 10 or 9 of 10, but for the most part, the 10 best players will have played the previous week. That's why they're here. That's why they're in this field. And again, this year, it is true. If you look at the DraftKings pricing, sure enough, the 10 most expensive players in the DraftKings field played last week. And so you have this sort of implication that there's an advantage, but really all this is telling us is that the best players in the field are likely to win. And it's also only a 9-year sample. It's really dangerous to kind of look at these types of trends. And I think the best way to frame it is that, look, golf analysis, we have probably all been fanatics. If you're watching this show, you probably love golf and you've been interested in golf for a few years, or you're just jumping in from other sports. But the key here is that overall, golf analysis is kind of well behind analysis in sports like football and baseball that get a lot more attention or have been more analytically inclined for so many years, like it has been the case with baseball. And so the types of analysis that you see around the golf industry, it hasn't had the time to be vetted and to be peer reviewed the way that these other sports have. And I think what this provides is a really nice opportunity where we don't really have to try that hard to create an advantage, because an advantage is being created for us. And all we have to do is take advantage of this type of analysis that people are making mistakes on. And it's true in the betting industry. You can still find some lines that are too low, or you can fade lines that have been pushed to a number that surely you don't want to touch because people are chasing these types of narratives or trends. But it's especially true in DFS, where the ownerships get inflated, and they get inflated to such a degree that's not only predictable, but makes it a very clear choice to fade certain guys, to pivot to others. I think if all you do in the Sony Open year after year is fade really popular players who are only popular because they played last week, and instead use guys who rate out very similarly in models but didn't play last week, in the long run, you're going to make quite a bit of money in DFS just from that one strategy. So that's kind of the lead-in tangent just about this event. But I think last year there was another really specific example of this type of mistake when using trends, and it's one that I've said before. So apologies to any longtime listeners who have heard this one before, but maybe it's such a fun one to me that hopefully you get some joy in hearing it again as well. It had to do with the Masters, and this trend was placed within a list of maybe 10 different trends, and all were meant to kind of direct you in how you select somebody that you're going to bet on to win. And the trend was something along the lines of like 55 of the last 58 winners of the Masters. I can't remember the exact number. Were not defending champs. In other words, they weren't able to defend their crown at the Masters. And the reason why this one is so funny is because though I can't remember the exact numbers, I do remember that the win percentage that this stat gave defending champs was a 5% win rate, which is far better than the win rate for people not defending. And I think this one is a very specific mistake that has to do with conditional probabilities. So this coming year, for example, we'll hear a lot of like, it's going to be really difficult for Scottie Scheffler to defend. Or people will say, I like Scottie this week, but can he really win 2 straight Masters? And that's not really the question. The question of can somebody win 2 straight has to do with the probability of them winning the first and winning the second. But Scottie has already done the first. He's already won that one. So for him, the question is now, can he win the second conditional on the fact that he won the first? And that's a very different answer. It's a much higher probability. And these kinds of mistakes we see time and time again in PGA. So in NFL, for example, a lot of the analysis that I've done this year, some of the analysis that has brought some of you to this show and to our PGA product here at FTN is about gaining an edge over the field. And again, I think with PGA, a lot of the time, while I do think we have done a really good job of creating edges with the course fit model, with our proprietary strokes gain driving accuracy metric, in this specific case with golf, we can also just take advantage of the opportunities, the edges that are presented to us. And that makes PGA a really fun and unique opportunity. And certainly one that I think the edge is probably greater in PGA right now than in any other sport. Just so happens to be what I think is the most fun sweat in all of sports, whether it's betting outrights, whether it's DFS sweats. It's so much fun to tune into golf tournaments and kind of really root on your guys coming down the final stretch. But yeah, it's kind of the perfect storm of being that fun to watch and also potentially having the largest edge in all of the sports gambling industry, whatever you want to call this fun little hobby that we all have together. But with that, we can jump into some of the analysis specific to the Sony Open here at YLI Country Club. I mentioned the course fit model, and this is a fun one this week. New this week in my course fit article, I've begun to rate the predictive power of the course fit model on a scale of 1 to 10. And I already know that if I make a mistake on this, it's going to be that I have way too many courses rated higher than 5, because my goal is to make 5 the average, like typical week on tour. So there are going to be plenty of weeks where the course fit model might only be like a 3 out of 10 or a 4 out of 10. And that's not to say, hey, we can't rely on this, we don't have an advantage this week. It's just to say, maybe use the course fit model just directionally or as a tiebreaker, go for the guys who are better. This week is not one of those, however. This is an 8 out of 10. This model is extremely predictive. It's built on a large sample. And the other aspect of it is it's really unique. There might be some that are super predictive, and then the skill sets that it points to are kind of just like the skill sets that make really good golfers good golfers. And all the skill set weights are going to be kind of like tour average. So even though it's really reliable, we can't really gain much of an edge from it because it's just going to point to golfers that everybody already knows are really good golfers. Again, though, this week's is really unique. The signal for driving distance is almost nothing. Unfortunately, you just can't gain a whole lot from being long off the tee here. And that's in part because the fairways are super narrow, and so you need to be able to hit the ball straight. But it's also because a lot of these holes take driver out of your hands, and everyone's just going to be laying up to the same positions anyway. Therefore, it's not that surprising that approach play gets a real boost this week. And perhaps a little bit surprising is that around the green play gets a really nice boost. So far, what I've seen around the industry is people mostly talking about this place being an irons and putting contest. And that's not quite what my model shows. It's that it's irons, yes, but around the green is really, really important too. And Josh really alluded to the fact that like that's probably especially true if the wind picks up. And he also referenced a quote from Adam Scott basically saying, it's going to be difficult for anybody to consistently get around this golf course without having the need to scramble and scramble quite a bit. So last week we pointed to around the green play having signal in large part because it was probably helping people to score and to make birdies. And that Adam Scott quote kind of directs us the opposite. This time around the green play, once again, is predictive, but it's predictive because you need to rely on it to continue to make pars and to not drop strokes instead of just gaining strokes. But in any case, a very straightforward course fit model this week, and one that points to a very select or specific kind of prototype of player, which brings me to my outright bets for the week. So it starts for me with Siwoo Kim, 50-1 at BetMGM. And if you look at the course fit projections this week, the thing that stands out to me is he's 8th in this field in my expected strokes gain metric. He rates out really well in both the baseline and the course fit expected strokes gain projections. And when you look at who he is as a player, he's kind of just solid all around, elite around the green. So that is certainly one reason why he's really popping, but very strong with his irons. As I wrote in my course fit article, he's somebody who has sort of always had the potential to get really hot with those irons. And, it might only happen like once a month, but that once a month, he sustains really solid iron play throughout an event. It seems as though he's starting to come around and become more consistently strong with those irons. That's a very good sign. He's also accurate off the tee, and the putting is what has the potential to hold him back. But again, if he were a good putter, he wouldn't be $8,200 on DraftKings and 50-1. He'd be, $9,900 on DraftKings, and he'd be 25-1. So it's the most volatile aspect of golf. We can hope for some positive putting variance and hope that happens this week when he is such a great fit for the course. Other than that, then we get into two guys that I think are probably the biggest specialists for this course: Webb Simpson, Mackenzie Hughes. Both of these guys, if they have a major weakness, it's off the tee, and then solid with the irons. Mackenzie Hughes still developing as an iron player, but he was getting better and better towards the end of last season. Has gained strokes with his irons in his last 50 rounds now, even though he is long-term losing with his irons still. But it was therefore nice to see that he also gained last week at Kapalua, and his both around the green play and putting are really, really strong. Love to see that for this golf course. You can say the exact same thing for Webb. His strengths are iron play, around the green play, putting. Really struggled towards the end of last season. I mean, in his last 20 rounds, he has lost almost 9/10 of a stroke per round. So really kind of banking on this number being inflated because of how poorly he played and him finding a little bit of a return to form after such a long layoff. Then we get to Gary Woodland. Woodland might be my favorite bet of the week, and he is not a course fit specialist. Obviously, his greatest strength is distance off the tee, gains over a third of a stroke per round with his distance off the tee, and actually loses with accuracy off the tee. But towards the end of last season, he was starting to drive the ball as straight as he has in years, basically since the years where he won the US Open, when he was the best version of himself. And even through his struggles, he sustained really strong iron play. So I love to see that from him. Recently, really struggled around the green and on the greens, but historically he's been fine in those areas. So I don't view them as long-term weaknesses. In fact, if he hadn't had such a struggle towards the end of last season, his long-term numbers both on and around the greens would still be positive. He'd still be gaining on the average tour player. So I like this bet for him, basically just betting on his talent at this number. And then we get to David Lipsky, a long shot, somebody who, like Mackenzie Hughes, Josh is also kind of all over this week. Just a misprice here. I think he's far more talented than this price suggests. He's another guy like Siwoo who rates out really well in both the baseline strokes gained and course fit expected strokes gained. Accurate off the tee, not very long. That's helpful here. Strong with his irons, strong around the green, what more can you ask for? Kind of like Siwoo again. If there's a weakness, it's with the putter. But a missed price for a guy who's not a great putter, that's kind of what we want, because we know that in any given week that putting can turn around. The only other note I wanted to make about these winners, these outright bets, I should say, is that I have interest in all of them in DFS, but less so on Webb and less so on Mackenzie Hughes. I think both of these guys, particularly because of their weakness off the tee, they bring some risk for their DraftKings price, in the sense that they might not even have the opportunity to take advantage of their iron play, to take advantage of their around the green play and putting, if they're putting themselves too far behind the 8-ball off the tee. With Webb Simpson, there's also the risk that the long layoff doesn't actually help him, and he continues to struggle the way he did at the end of last season. So a little bit more directed towards just the outright bets for those two guys. But Siwoo, even Lipsky, Gary Woodland, I'm going to have quite a bit of interest on the DFS side of things as well. Then we kind of get to the top of the field. And, I mentioned it, the 10 most expensive players in this field are all the 10 best players in this field. And that's why we see that trend. And it also means that I kind of have interest in all of them for DFS, and we'll really wait and see the ownership for all of these guys before I kind of narrow in on which of them I really want to target the most for DFS this week. I'm going to check the Discords real quick to see if we have any questions. Doesn't look like it. That's what we get for recording on Tuesday night at 8:30 p.m. Let's see. Anything else about this event? One other thing I wanted to talk about just briefly is when we do get a really unique course fit model like this one of the questions that I'm often asked is how do I balance whether I'm looking at my course fit expected strokes gained versus my baseline talent expected strokes gained more, because we do get some pretty severe differences. Like two guys I highlighted as course fit specialists, Christian Bezuidenhout and Andrew Putnam this week. Really strong course fit expected strokes gained projections and fairly weak baseline strokes gained projections. And I think the answer comes down to the predictive power of the model. If this week's model was like a 3 out of 10, I would say, you know what, I want to follow the course fit model directionally, but I don't really care what it's telling me. I just care about how I want to adjust that baseline strokes gain number. So, for example, like instead of targeting Andrew Putnam, I would look to target, let's say, Matt Kuchar, for example. So somebody who has a higher baseline strokes gained, but not quite, and is still benefiting from the skill sets that the course fit model is pointing to, but I'm not relying on that course fit specialist aspect of it to make them a strong play. Matt Kuchar's baseline strokes gained is good enough that he would still be a strong play even if I didn't have a ton of confidence in the model. But on a week like this, where the model is really strong, I love those types of plays, like the Putnam and Bezuidenhout plays, where I'm hoping that the fact that they aren't quite as good for their price from a baseline expected strokes gained point of view makes people off of them and makes them really contrarian plays that I think have a high probability of success here. So I think there's a very good chance that both Bezuidenhout and Putnam will be in my DFS core this week. Maybe I'll be a little bit off there, and we'll find out that, hey, a lot of people are kind of on this fit for one of the two. I think maybe Bezuidenhout has a chance to be popular. He's always a name that people like to go to whenever they feel like he fits the course. And certainly people know that he's not long off the tee. So I think everybody is kind of aware that, hey, distance isn't really that helpful here. So maybe I will just end up on Siwoo Kim and Andrew Putnam in this area. We'll kind of see in that regard. But yeah, I don't have a ton else about this week. I'm really excited to get Justin back on the show. I think having a conversation with Justin about a lot of these trends types of stuff will be a really fun one to have, and will be kind of enlightening for everybody, because I'm curious to kind of hear his thoughts on the trends analysis, because as a player myself, I'm not sure how I would have felt about this type of argument that, hey, somebody who has played the last week has an inherent advantage over somebody else. I think at the time, prior to my kind of diving into the data side of golf, I might have been a little bit quicker to believe that sort of thing and to just accept it as a narrative that made sense to me, and therefore accept these trends. Whereas now I kind of know the danger of that. So I'll be interested to hear his thoughts on that. And one other thing I wanted to note, the point I made earlier about like PGA analysis kind of being behind NFL and MLB, there's a perfect example, and it stems from our proprietary strokes gained driving accuracy metric. If you think about what strokes gained driving accuracy is doing, the first of which is that it accounts for the distance a player hits the ball and adjusts the accuracy as a result. It's very similar to completion percentage over expected in the NFL, where we are adjusting completion percentage for the average depth of target that the quarterback throws it. A quarterback who's averaging 12-yard passes down the field is unlikely to complete as many passes as somebody who's only averaging 6.5, 7 yards on their average pass down the field. So now, if we want to get a little bit more technical, like strokes gained driving accuracy is probably somewhere more like a composite between completion percentage over expected and EPA per play, since it's also accounting for the fact that not every hit fairway and not every missed fairway are equal. Some missed fairways are far better than others. Some hit fairways are far better than others, just like some completed passes are far better than others. Like if you complete a 12-yard pass on 3rd and 8, that's a hell of a lot better than a 12-yard pass on 3rd and 20. So it's doing both. But the point here is that if you tune in to an NFL broadcast, you might see a stat on completion percentage over expected on with the NFL referring to their next gen stats. If you are looking around the industry from one site to the other, whether it's FTN, PFF, whoever, you're going to see analysis that includes completion percentage over expected. Yet you will never on a broadcast see strokes gained driving accuracy because we at FTN are the only ones who have it. You won't see it when you look around the industry. And so again, like it just drives home this point that in a lot of ways, PGA and just golf in general has all of this untapped potential that some of these other sports don't have. And that's why, like, when we say things like, hey, the edge is awesome in PGA, we're not talking out of our ass. We're not just trying to sell you and bring you into this product. It's true. The edge really does exist. And I think with that, we can move on to the next week. And hopefully Justin will be back by then. He should be. I know he's racing in the Chili Bowl this week, I believe. So good luck to Justin on that. And we will catch you next time.